I took my first job out of college working for my dad. And he was a great dad to work for because he paid really, really low wages. And whenever I went to him and said, hey, I need to make more money, he said, hey, great, be worth more money. And I ended up working for him for about, gosh, it must have been about 9 months. And I struck out on my own, and I've been at it ever since. And there was a lot of support there for my dad to do that, so I don't want to sound negative. But I had an interesting and unique experience in my life when I was, gosh, it was 2000 through 2005, about a 5-year period of time. At the time, I was roughly 30 years old. I turned 30 in 1999, so it was just right after that. And the experience is that I had the ability to get a firsthand, not just a look, I was deeply in the trenches of watching an incubator for entrepreneurs. Okay, so I already was an entrepreneur. I had been since 1994 when I started my business. This is about 6 years in. And during that time, what I had an ability to observe was I started a business that was an offshoot of my original business. My original business is I was a marketing consultant. I told you that I worked with a company like Lawn Smith Roofing. That was early in my career. I ended up working with another company called National Bank Drafting Systems. And I got involved with this company on a profit-sharing basis. And we took that company using marketing from about $2 million in sales to the high $28, $29 million in sales in about 2 years. And my partner at the time and I were able to participate in the profitability of that company. It was very profitable, and I was very young. I was almost right around 30 years old, made a lot of money, thought I was really cool and really awesome, which I really wasn't, but I thought I was. And we took and expanded our business at the time. And the way that we expanded our business was we went out all around the country and we started to recruit and train and support marketing consultants all over the country. It was sold as a business opportunity. It was very similar to a franchise, except it was technically not a franchise. It was a licensing situation. They paid us a licensing fee. It was substantial. And we recruited over the course of about 4 years, 4.5 years, we recruited about 1,100 of these people in every state in the country and Canada, and a few assorted ones from overseas, but it wasn't a big part. And here's the punchline. That business completely, utterly, totally failed. We went from having a 16,000 square foot office with 90 employees to I don't know, I never counted the square feet. Let's call it a 1,000 square foot office with 6 employees in about a 1-year period of time. It crashed and it burned spectacularly. Part of the reason it crashed and burned is because of some things that I did. Some of the reasons it crashed and burned were a really toxic partnership situation. And part of the reason that it crashed and burned is that the elements of what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur were much different than I expected they would be going into that. So here's how that worked. I had made a lot of money being a marketing consultant, and I went out to the marketplace, and the sales pitch went like this. If you're tired of your job, and if you want to make more money, and you're tired of working for somebody else, I've got a system that I can show you that'll allow you to be your own boss, be a marketing consultant, we'll train you how to do it, we'll give you support, and you can make, and the claim we used to make was you can make $300,000 to $700,000 a year as a marketing consultant. And to us, that claim seemed very middle of the road because, quite frankly, we had earned a lot more than that being marketing consultants at a very young age. And it never really occurred to me that you couldn't just take anybody else that seemed reasonably motivated and make them into a successful entrepreneur. I know now that that was a false thought. And I'm going to give you some ideas of what I saw both in the people that I worked with and in myself that allowed success and failure to happen as entrepreneurs. Now, I want to ask you this question before we get started. Who in the room, by show of hands, owns the company that you're here representing? You're the actual owner. Okay, by way of a different way of asking, who's not the owner of the company? Okay, looks like maybe a 60-40 split. Does that sound about right? I'm here today to talk to the business owners. I'm here to offer you some encouragement. I'm here to offer you some hindsight things that I've learned that maybe can help you as you move forward in your business, okay? If you're not the owner of the business and you'd like to be, well, maybe this can help you out. But I don't have a big message for the people that are employees, the people that are, not trying to do their own thing. But maybe you'll find some value in it anyway. The first concept I want to throw out is what's the difference between an entrepreneur and not an entrepreneur? And there's been books written on this. Maybe you've read a book called, what's it called? Michael Gerber, The E-Myth. And he talks about there's a myth that somebody that owns their own business is an entrepreneur. And really, most entrepreneurs from that standpoint are really just technicians. It's a guy that's good at, installing roofs, and now he gets his own roofing company, and now suddenly he thinks he's an entrepreneur. But here's what I found. I found that it really has a lot more to do with not so much are you a technician or not a technician. It has more to do with what I call IPV and DPV. And these are some funny little initials that I came up with. It stands for the following. IPV stands for Independent Personal Value. I'll just jot them on the board. I'm kind of a whiteboard scratcher. IPV and DPV. IPV, Independent Personal Value. DPV is Dependent Personal Value. Now here's what this means. In the context of running, starting, owning, and growing a business, IPV says, I'm the kind of person that has independent personal value. I am not reliant on a pre-existing organization or company or entity of some sort to be able to add value to the marketplace. The opposite of that is dependent personal value. I am dependent on an existing organization or company or structure of some sort that I can plug into and add value to the organization and therefore add value to, the economy at large and make money, okay? IPV versus DPV. I found that these two things are extraordinarily different, and most people don't understand that these two different things exist and that they're different. I'll give you an example. I knew a guy, I still know the guy, but at the time, this is going back about 15 years ago, this guy was the CEO of a major food industry company. He was the CEO. I don't know how big the company was, but it was somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple $100 million in sales, a pretty significant company. He was then recruited to be the next CEO for a $3 billion food industry company. Now, they brought him in for about 2 years while the existing CEO was still transitioning out and he was going to retire. So they brought him in to be the CEO of this $3 billion company. Now, that's pretty impressive if you ask me, a $3 billion company. I can't really, that's you, not me. I can't really fathom $3 billion in sales. But here's the interesting thing. There was some politics in that company, and long story short, it's not really important to this story, but he ended up getting politically within the company screwed over, and they sort of put him out to pasture, and he didn't become the CEO. And because he didn't become the CEO, he decided he was going to quit and start his own business. Now, you might hear that story and say, well, they didn't want him to be the CEO. He wasn't qualified to be the CEO. The reality is he was eminently qualified to run that company. He had run a very successful $200 million company. But when he got out of that company, the $3 billion company, he went and started his own company with his son. And it was in the food packaging business, which was an offshoot of a business that he knew well. And within 18 months, the business completely failed. He put half of his life savings, which was significant, into this business, and he absolutely failed, lost the whole investment. Here's the question. How is it that a guy who's qualified to run a $3 billion company can't run a $1 million a year packaging company? How's that even possible? How is it that it fails to the point that he loses half of his life savings and it goes completely out of business? And the answer is over here on the board. IPV versus DPV. You take that guy, you stick him in a $3 billion organization up here at the top, and you say, here's all of our divisions, here's all of our managers, here's all of our people, here's the problems that we're trying to solve. And this guy, I'm telling you, he knew what he was doing. I couldn't do that job. I don't have the patience to manage that much stuff. But when you sit him over here, and you say, what's your independent personal value? Your ability to add value to the marketplace, external, outside of a pre-existing entity or company, and he really doesn't have the mental wherewithal to pull it off. That's not saying he's mentally challenged or he's got some kind of problem. It's to say there's a whole different mindset. And here's what I found running this business from 2000 to 2005 with these marketing consultants. I found that the mindset to be able to run a business and run it successfully and run it well is tremendously different than somebody who doesn't have that ability. And we're going to explore that a little bit as we go through this. Now, here's what I also saw. And you may have seen this or experienced this either with yourself or people you know or others in the industry. A lot of times people will have the misguided understanding that if I start a business, that I will suddenly then somehow be this person that can be an entrepreneur. I like to look at it like this. If you're 45 years old or 50 years old and you've worked for a company and in a job your whole life, how many times have you personally been on the hook for payroll? In other words, if payroll isn't there, it has to come either out of your pocket or people will not get paid, which is illegal, by the way. And the guy that runs the $3 billion company says, I don't know what you're talking about. The payroll's just always been there. That's really not my concern. And if it is my concern, what do? We'll just lay people off. And then it becomes their concern. Well, here's what I found. You can't just show up to be an entrepreneur and expect things to be entrepreneurial for you. There's an interesting story. Has anybody seen the movie Lonesome Dove? It's one of my favorite movies. It's from 1988. It's a cowboy movie. The story is about these two cowboys that were retired, Texas Rangers, thank you. They lived down on a little border town, and they're kind of bored. So they got the idea from one of their buddies that they could take a bunch of cattle, they go over to Mexico, steal all the cattle that the Mexicans had stolen from them. They just kept stealing them back and forth. That's what they did for a living. They had nothing else to do. So they finally decided, we'll steal the cattle, and they heard that if they drive the cattle up to Montana, that there was land that they could claim up there and they could ranch and they could make a fortune. Well, they didn't really want to make a fortune because they didn't really feel like they needed a fortune, but they decided to do it anyway because they had nothing else to do. So this entire movie, it's 6 hours long, is about them driving the cattle from Texas all the way up to Montana, and lots of bad things happen along the way. Okay, that's the gist of the movie. Well, one of the things that happens is a subplot where there's a girl that lives down in Lonesome Dove. It's the town where they come from, and her name's Lori. And Lori is a, shall we say, madam of the night. Her job, she's a prostitute, okay? And one of the main characters, Gus, who's played by Robert Duvall, is a frequent customer of hers, but he's also really takes a liking to her on a personal level. And when they decide that they're going to leave Lonesome Dove and they're going to go to Montana, she gets really upset, and she says, I'm going to go with you. I want to go on the cattle drive with you, because I want to get out of Lonesome Dove. I've got to get out of this town. I have to leave. And what I want to do is I want to go with you on the cattle drive to Denver, and then I'm going to take the train and I'm going to go to San Francisco. If I can just get to San Francisco, everything will be great for me. So she goes on the cattle drive against all of their recommendations. It's too hard. It's very difficult. And sure enough, as they go on the cattle drive, she gets stolen by Indians. And if you get stolen by Indians, here's what you need to know about that. Nothing good is going to happen. So she gets stolen by Indians. Everything imaginable that you can think happens to her. And they end up recovering her later. And there's this scene where it's raining and she's cold and she's been physically beat up. She's bloody and she's crying. And she looks at Gus and she says, Gus, I just need to get to San Francisco. If I can just get there. And she's just in tears. And he looks at her and he says, Lori, darling, life in San Francisco is still just life. Still just life. You're not going to change was the message. You don't show up at a different address and suddenly become a different person. There's a process of change that has to happen. If you're in a business, which 60% of you raised your hand and said you are, here's what I want you to explore right now in your mind. I want you to just think about this for a minute, and we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about this. Where do you want to be versus where are you right now? And what's keeping you from getting there? I'm looking around the room. I see a lot of gray hair. Not everybody. I'm getting close. Actually, I'm just losing mine. But you've been at it a while. Are you where you want to be? And I think if we polled the room, we'd have a handful of people that raise their hand and say, yeah, I'm where I want to be. I'm right tracking along. And if that's you, you could come up here and you give us a great speech, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. But there's probably more of us, and I'm putting myself in the category, that aren't quite where we want to be. So the question is, why? Why are you not where you want to be? And here's what I think it is. I think it has a lot to do with belief. And I'm going to talk about this topic for a while. When I was 15 years old, I have a dad. He was an entrepreneur. He's in the real estate business, not really my thing. Very successful. He had his ups and downs in real estate. But I had a dad that was the kind of dad that brought good ideas to me. And when I was 15 years old, he handed me a book. It was called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Anybody read that book before? When you're 15 years old and you read the book Think and Grow Rich, it's like 3/3 weird. I mean, it's kind of a weird book, and you're reading this stuff, and there's all these weird stories, and there's this chapter on sexual transmutation. You're like, I don't know, what? Why did my dad give me this book? It's so weird. But there's one thing in there that I remember, and I'm going to jot this on the board. Here's what Napoleon Hill says. You've probably heard this before. You may not even known that it came from Napoleon Hill. Here's what he says. Anything the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. You've probably heard that before. Now, here's how I heard that when I was 15 years old. I heard it like this. Anything that the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. And I saw it like this. This is how I interpreted that. If you can conceive it and believe it, then you can achieve it. And I sort of clumped these two things together. And then I realized later on, conceiving something and believing something are two absolutely, utterly different things. They're not really even on the same spectrum, but I always just sort of clumped them there. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story. I had one of my prospective consultants walk into my office. This is back in that era when we were recruiting these guys. And he walked in and he had a really big chip on his shoulder. And he said to me, he said, I don't believe that this business can earn $300,000 to $700,000 a year. That's what he said. I didn't even know this guy. He walked into my office. He wanted to have a meeting. I took the meeting. And he walked in with all this attitude. I don't believe that you can make $300,000 to $700,000 a year. And I looked at him and I said, I don't appreciate you imposing your limiting belief on me, my business, and everybody else that's involved in this business. He said, well, I just don't believe it. And I said, well, I've done it. He said, well, I know you've done it, but I don't think anybody else can do it. Maybe somebody else could do it, but I don't believe you can do it. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. How much money did you earn last year? He said, well, that's private. I said, not in this room, it's not. How much money did you earn last year? He said, well, 6 figures. And I said, well, that's a wide range. Was it 101,000 or 999,000? Those are both 6 figures. And he didn't want to say. And I beat it out of him. And he finally said, well, it was 125,000. Okay. I've got a guy walking into my office who's roughly 45 or 50 years old, who's made $125,000. Now, here's what I know about this guy. Not a lot, but I'm going to give him benefit of the doubt. He's earnest. He's hardworking. He's honest. He's tried hard. And at the end of 45 years of life or 50 years of life, he has managed to make $125,000 a year. And I'm telling you, it starts to set as a belief of what is possible. Now, we're going to toggle back and forth a couple of stories here. We're going to go to the Bible. I'm not up here to preach to you, but I am going to tell you a Bible story. You probably heard this one. It's the parable of the talents. Who's heard that before? The parable of the talents. And I think I've actually got a slide here for you. I got the power baby. He's not part of this. He's just telling you, right on, you can do it. So here's the parable of the talents. And if you remember this parable, here's what happens. The Lord of the vineyard comes to his 3 servants and he says, look, I'm fixing to leave. He's in Texas probably. He says, I'm fixing to leave. And while I'm gone, I want you to take care of my stuff. And they all say, okay, great. So if you remember the story, he gives one of the servants 5 talents. Another one he gives 2 talents. And another one he gives 1 talent. And it's a little bit tempting to hear that and think, well, this is about money. But just think of it in terms of units of value. Now, here's a good question. Why did he give one guy 5 and another guy 2 and another guy 1? Why was it that distribution? Why wasn't it 1, 1, 1 or 2, 2, 2 or 5, 2, 2 or something else? And the answer, best I can tell from reading that scripture, is pretty clear. I don't know. He doesn't say. Clearly, we don't know. He may have had some sort of a rationale. Maybe he knew something about the 5-talent guy that made him want to trust him with 5. Maybe he knew something about the 1-talent guy that made him not trust him. I don't really know. But here's what he did. He said, I'm going to leave, and I want you to go into the marketplace, and I want you to trade, and I want you to see what you can do while I'm gone. And he left. And it says that he left for a season. I don't know how long a season is, but I perceive that a season is measured as a unit of time that is long enough to expect measurable progress. And he came back, and he did something very important. He took an accounting, and he said, okay, how'd you do? So here's what happened. I'm going to put this on the board. The guy that had 5 talents turned his 5 talents into 10. You might remember this story. Remember the guy that got 2 talents? What did he do? Does anybody remember? Turned it into 4. The third servant took his 1, and when he came back, the master said, what did you do? And he said, well, he gave a very interesting answer. He said, I know that thou art an austere man, and thou hast reaped where thou hast not sown. In other words, he says, you're kind of a jerk, master, and you got this talent not by earning it, but by taking it. And because of that, I took it and I buried it. I didn't do what you asked. I didn't take it and trade it. I buried it. And he gave all these excuses about why. And he blamed it on the master, not on himself. And the master looked at him and said, that's interesting. And here's what he did. He took the talent. Anybody remember what he did with it? He gave it to the guy with 5. Why would he give it to the guy with 5? Well, to me, it's obvious. I think hey, we're not going to get political here, but I think about half of America looks at that and says, well, that's not fair. In this country, we have what's called, at least theoretically, what's called a meritocracy, which means you gain according to what you deserve. You gain according to what you deserve. Now, I think it's very interesting, these numbers. I don't think these numbers are random. I don't think they're haphazard. I don't think that they were put in the scriptures at these exact ratios on accident. I think, based on my experience, I think that they're there for a very specific reason. What do we know about these numbers? The 5 and the 2 guy. It's obvious. They doubled. Is that random, or is that by chance, or is that on purpose, do you think? I think it's on purpose. And here's what I think it means. This is my observation. I think that a human being only has the ability to believe about double where they're currently at. Let that sink in for a minute. I think a human being only has the ability to believe about double where they're currently at. Now, let's go back to what the mind can erroneously conceive and believe. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those apart. And we're going to say what the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve. Now, if you look at people that make money, I think we can all conceive that it's possible to make money. Does anybody know anybody in the remodeling industry that's making millions and millions of dollars a year? I do. I can name a half a dozen guys that I know make over $2 million a year take-home money from remodeling companies. I don't know about you, but that seems like a pretty decent amount of money. I mean, is that okay with you? $2 million a year, personal take-home money? It's pretty good. I think we can conceive that there's more available. You look at somebody like, I don't know, Donald Trump, right? He's kind of a jerk, but whatever. He's made who knows how many millions or billions of dollars. And you can conceive that it's available. But can you actually believe it? Let's go back to this guy. Remember this guy, $125,000. I asked him a question. How much money do you make? He said $125,000. And I asked him this question. How much do you think you can make? You said you can't make $300,000 to $700,000 a year. How much do you think you can make? Guess what his number was on the nose? Well, probably $250,000. And I went, interesting. He didn't know what I was talking about. He didn't know I was sort of sitting there going, interesting. But here's what I believe. It's my belief. The mind can believe about double where you're currently at. That's all you can achieve. And I found that this is a huge stumbling block for people, because here's what people tend to do. They tend to think that they are worth a lot more talents than they actually are, so they're trying to achieve a lot more than they actually can, and their beliefs pull them back. So in other words, if we look over here, the first servant has 5. After 1 season, he had 10. Here's what I found with entrepreneurs. They tend to be a very ambitious bunch. And we tend to look at where we're at, and when we're sitting there at a 2-talent level, we tend to overestimate ourselves, and we tend to put ourselves at a 4 level, or a 6 level, or a 10 level. And if you ask us, what can you achieve? You think your belief is a lot higher than it is. And I've seen this cause many, many entrepreneurs a lot of problems. So here's what you need to do. Here's what we've got to look at. What is your current production level? Truly, honestly, what is your current production level? In other words, where are you on this talents list? Are you a 1-talent guy? Are you a 2-talent guy? Are you a 5-talent guy? Here's my observation. People that just start as entrepreneurs, they just get involved, they're a 1-talent guy. And almost always, guess what they think they are? 5 talents. And guess what they almost always are doing? They're chasing 10-talent goals. Meanwhile, their belief system won't allow it. It's all very subconscious. And they almost always fail. We hear these stories all the time. The statistics are staggering, right? What percentage of businesses fail? Like 90% or something? Why do businesses fail? My opinion is that businesses fail because people don't actually believe that they can succeed. And they run after things that they have no business running after. They're trying to do things that they don't have a belief system to accomplish, and they fail miserably. I know it because I watched it. I watched 1,100 guys, average age 45, 50 years old, average net worth $300,000 to $400,000, average job experience, working for corporate America for 25 years. I watched them be so frustrated with their financial situation and their job and their lack of ability to get where they wanted to go financially that they made the leap in their mind from DPV to IPV, but they really stayed over here. They got over here, they started thinking they were 2-talent guys, 3-talent guys, 4-talent guys. They started chasing things. Their businesses got bigger than their britches, and they failed. Okay? So I want to show you something on the board here. I'm going to erase this. I'm going to show you how I visualize beliefs. I visualize beliefs like a tabletop. And I'm not an artist, I'm a marketing guy, so sort of bear with me. That's a tabletop. It's in 3D, if you believe it or not. And here's what happens. On top of this table, we're going to write a belief that you have about yourself. Now think about it in terms of your business, but it could be any belief about anything about yourself. It could be, I'm an awesome driver, I'm a terrible conversationalist, whatever. But let's talk about your money. And let's put on this board right here, how much money do you think that you could make? Look, I know it's not all about money. I get that it's not all about money. I am living proof that it's not all about money. I've had money, and I've been in debt 7 figures. That's not fun. You know, when you get a business going and you're a little bit too big for your britches, it's easy to go right past 0 down into the negatives. I've been there. But put a number on here. And here's what I found. I found that if you have a belief, and it's on this tabletop, that there's going to be legs that develop to support that belief. Now I'm going to give you an example that everybody can kind of relate to. We talked earlier about SEO, and it's kind of like weight loss. We're going to use weight loss again. And the reason I use weight loss as an example is because I think everybody either personally can sort of relate to it, or at least you know people that can relate to it that are close to you. And so we're going to put a belief over here. And the belief is a 40-year-old man who weighs 290 pounds. And he goes to his doctor, and his doctor says, you need to lose weight. You're overweight. And the doctor checks him out and says, you should weigh 180 pounds. So he's 110 pounds overweight. And if we put this belief on this tabletop, what would that belief, how would we manifest that? What would the belief be? What does that guy think about himself in terms of his weight? How does he say it to himself? Okay, that is exactly right. I am fat. He doesn't say I'm overweight. He doesn't say I'm big boned. He looks in the mirror and he says, I might say to other people that I'm big boned. I might minimize it to other people, but in his mind, he knows I'm fat. Now, what are the beliefs that support that? Now, we got table legs. These are experiences that this person has. And he says, you know what? I bought the gym membership and I quit going. Then I bought the home machine and it's got clothes hanging on it. Then I tried the Atkins diet and that failed. Then I tried the cottage cheese diet and that failed. Then what? Then I had to go buy new pants because I was too fat for my old ones. Then what? South Beach diet, fail. 24-hour fitness, fail. Diet pill, fail. What else? I went to my class reunion and everybody looked at me and said, wow, you're fat. And pretty soon there's so many legs under this table that it's not only extraordinarily stable table, it's immovable. Now, here's what happens. You go to the fat guy and you say, okay, you need to lose weight. What's the traditional advice that we give the fat guy? Guy needs to lose 110 pounds. What do you say to him? Diet, exercise. Okay, specifically how much diet and how much exercise? And we say to him, okay, here's what you need to do. I think this is a pretty reasonable plan. Tell me if you think this is a reasonable plan. The reasonable plan is I need you to do 30 minutes of cardio 3 days a week. You can just go out for a walk, right? And I need you to cut your calories to maybe 1,700 calories. And there's apps now that can track that for you, right? And here's what happens. The fat guy looks at that, and here's what he says to himself. Man, this is awesome. I'm going to do it. I'm really motivated this time. It's January, it's New Year's, whatever resolution. And inside, his fat self is laughing and pointing at him and saying, it's never going to happen. You're just fat. Look at all the evidence. You can't overcome that. And he goes out and he walks for 30 minutes, and he keeps 1,700 calories for about 2 or 3 days, and then he fails miserably again. And now what? Another table leg. And I'm telling you, it is hard to change. This is why people stay about the same weight their whole life. They stay about their same income level their whole life. They stay in about the same kind of relationships their whole life. They stay about the same amount of spiritual their whole life. Because we develop these beliefs about who we are. Not to borrow my own word from earlier, but we develop an identity of who we are, and we cling to it. We cling to it. Now, whatever. You can look at me and you could probably say, I don't really struggle with my weight. But I'm going to tell you, I've got this internal mechanism where if I go up by about 4 or 5 pounds, I immediately start exercising more and eating less. It's just automatic. I don't really think about it. I've been doing it for 20 years because I have an identity inside my brain that says this is about what your body size and style is. And it just automatically corrects. So when you start trying to mess with this, it throws everything out of whack. And even consciously, if you're excited, subconsciously, you're screwed. So let's create a better plan for this guy. I'm going to tell you a story about Susan Powdered. Anybody remember this woman? She was a fitness guru from Dallas in the 1990s. She had infomercials. You may recall she had spiky blonde hair and she was hyperactive and she was just crazy silly. You remember this woman? Anyway, she sold exercise videos and books. She had a book called Stop the Insanity. I read the book. It had an interesting story in it. Here's what the story said. It said that she was always involved in bad, abusive relationships. She ended up marrying a guy that was really bad to her. She coped with it by eating. And she was something like 105 pounds. She got up to 270 pounds. Because every time her husband was difficult, she would just eat. And then he'd call her worthless. He would, beat on her. It was just a very negative, depressing situation. She said that the only reason she didn't kill herself, she wanted to kill herself. She said, I was ready to do it. I would have done it many, many times. She said, the only reason I didn't is because I had 2 kids, and I couldn't bear the thought of my kids going with my husband because he's such a loser. So she held on. She ended up, finally, he left her, and now she's single with these 2 kids and fat. And she said, one day, she got this idea in her brain. She said, I'm going to go get the mail today. That's it. I'm going to go get the mail. Now, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but she usually always just sent her kids out to get the mail. Because for her to walk out to the mailbox was a giant task. So that first day, she walked out to the mailbox. It took her a lot longer than it would take you or me. She finally got out to the mailbox. She got her mail, and she said to herself, wow, I made it. And she walked back inside. The next day, she went out and she got her mail again. The third day, she went out and got her mail again. Fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh day, she went out and got her mail. And about the eighth or ninth day, she got out to her mailbox. And she looked down the street. She said, I bet I could make it to the lamppost. And she walked to the lamppost. And the next day, she walked to the lamppost. And the next day, she walked to the lamppost. And after a week, she got to the lamppost. And she said, I bet I could make it to the end of the street. And she walked to the end of the street. And over the course of time, she started to develop her belief system. But it starts really, really small. I had a guy that worked for me. This is years ago. Guy came to me. He was young. He was married. He was in debt. He had a kid that had some significant health problems, like in and out of the hospital a lot. And he came to me, and he said, I need to earn more money because I don't get to spend any time with my kids. I have to work. I have to work an extra job. And I asked him. I didn't know him that well at the time. I said, why? And he said, well, because I'm in debt. Well, why are you in debt? And he explained to me things they had bought, his wife, just all these things, typical things, young, married. He was in debt. He said, I just want to spend more time with my kids. And I looked at him and I said, you don't deserve more time with your kids. He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, you've created a financial situation for yourself that you created by yourself with your wife. And you don't deserve to hang out with your kids because you've put yourself in a position where you've got to do other things because you've put your debt ahead of your kids. And it was like a gut punch because he was coming to me. He worked for me. He was hoping for more money. Learned that one from my dad. Be worth more money. And he said, well, what could I do to earn more money? Because he was working at Circuit City. He was sort of a tech guy. He said, I'm working at Circuit City. I'm making $7 an hour. I said, well, you need to learn to be more valuable. But he didn't understand owning a business. He didn't understand entrepreneurship. So here's what I did. I went to him and I said, I'm going to help you start a business. And he said, great. And he got all excited. I said, here's the business. It's a garage sale business. And he went, oh, garage sale business? I said, yeah. My wife is on my case right now to get a bunch of crap out of my garage, take it over to the Goodwill. Do this. Get a vehicle, come over to my garage, get the crap, take it over to your house, have a garage sale, and you're going to sell it, and you're going to give me half the money. And he goes, well, you're just going to take it to Goodwill. I said, I'm not giving it to you for free. I'd rather Goodwill have it than you have it. You don't deserve my stuff. What have you done to deserve my stuff? Nothing. Exactly. So he borrowed a pickup truck, came over, got all the crap out of my garage, took it to his house, held the garage sale, and a week later he brought me cash, like $117. He goes, here's your half of the money. I said, great. Now here's what we're going to do. I'm going to send a letter to my neighbors. I'm going to explain who you are and what you do, and my neighbors probably have a bunch of crap in their garage too. And you're going to come get their crap, and you're going to go sell it at your garage sale. So he did that. We sent out a letter. I had 4 people responded. I'm a marketing guy, so it's kind of fun. 4 people. He went and picked up their crap. He started holding a garage sale. The city came over to him and said, you can't hold more than 2 garage sales a year. If you do, it's a $5 fine. And I told him, you got to pay the $5 fine. Every time you hold a garage sale, don't make them catch you. You're going to go down to the city. You're going to pay your $5 fine. Finally, he got so much stuff in his garage sale that he made enough money to get out of debt. He started going to other neighborhoods, putting flyers on people's doors, taking their crap, and selling it at the garage sale. And I always told him, you have to tell them that you'll either give them half the money or you'll donate half the money to charity. You do not get to keep all the money. And he said, okay. And he abided by those rules. And after a short amount of time, he was out of debt. And I said, now what are you going to do? He says, I don't know. I said, here's what you could do. Why don't you buy a vending machine? We need some in our offices when we had a lot of employees. I said, you can have a vending machine. You can keep it full. You can make money that way. He started making money that way. Meanwhile, he started noticing, you know what? This stuff kind of sucks. It's nice because I'm out of debt, but it's not really where I wanted to be. He said, what would it take to be a marketing guy? I said, I don't know. What do you think it takes to be a marketing guy? He goes, I don't know. I guess I'd have to learn marketing. I said, bingo. He said, would you mind if I hung out with you? Would you teach me? Could I get your files? Could I get all the stuff that you've written? Could you teach me how to do it? Could I attend the trainings that you do? I said, you can do anything you want as long as you complete your job. And this guy took my book and he devoured it. He took my CDs and he devoured them. And this guy, within 12 months, was writing marketing better than any of my consultants. And within 2 years, He was writing marketing better than anyone but me. And now, I met this guy in 2001. He still works for me today, 15? It's this incremental, little, walk to the mailbox, walk to the lamppost, walk to the end of the street progression that we need to make. Now, here's the problem. I said it earlier. The problem is people always want to jump ahead in this progression. They want to look at themselves, instead of saying, look, I'm a 1-talent guy, they want to say, I'm a 10-talent guy, or I'm a 5-talent guy. And they want to start chasing those things. And it doesn't really work. You've got to let it work for you, because here's the problem. You can't overcome these beliefs. Here's what I want you to understand more than anything from this discussion of beliefs. Your brain is in charge, and it is a non-negotiable game. I had this experience one time. I was in charge of the young men's group at my church. And one of the things we had a program called Duty to God, where they could earn certain awards for doing things in the community and at school and in the church. And one of the areas was physical fitness. And in the physical fitness area, one of the things that they had to do was run 6 miles in less than an hour, which is kind of a big deal. So here's what I did. I went to these kids. I had about 12, no, it wasn't 12. It was about 8 or 9 of them in my group. And I said, anybody that can beat me in a 6-mile run, I will give you $100 cash. And I gave them 2 months to prepare. But it was a sucker bet, because I knew none of them could beat me no matter what, because they just couldn't. I knew that I was in better shape. I was only like 33 at the time. I could probably still beat them. I held up $900 cash. I said, anybody that beats me gets $100. And they were all excited. They were going to beat me, and they were talking smack. The Sunday before we were going to do it, we were going to do it on a Wednesday. The Sunday before, I forgot to check the rolls. But in the way the church works is when a kid turns a certain age, in this case, when the kid turns 16, they advance from the younger group into the older group. And I was with the older group, the 16 and 17-year-olds. And a kid advanced into my group that Sunday, and I didn't know he was coming. I just forgot to check. And he walks into class on Sunday, and I said, what are you doing here? And he says, well, I'm 16. I'm in your class now. And I went, oh. His name was Abram Lucero. He was the starting halfback for the high school soccer team as a freshman. If you know anything about soccer, here's what you need to know. The halfback is the most endurance guy in the whole team. He has to run the entire game. You can't sub out in soccer, and he was a freshman, and he was starter. And I said, okay. So they started telling him about this race. Well, we show up the next week. It's a 6-mile race. It's 3 2-mile laps around the church in the neighborhood there. So we take off, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to smoke these guys. We take off. We get about a mile into the race, and I look back, and I see all these kids just straggling and walking, and they're already dying. And there's a few kids that are, making a valiant effort. But 20 yards behind me, there's Abram Lucero, and he doesn't look tired at all. All right, keep going. We get 1 mile in. We've made 1 lap. Some of the kids have walked back through the lawns of the neighborhood of the church. They've just given up. A few kids are still out there, and Abram Lucero is there 20 yards behind. We take another lap, 4 miles. I look back. Abram Lucero is exactly 20 yards behind me, and he looks fresh. And I'm thinking, okay, we've got 1 lap to go. We get to the 5-mile mark. 5 out of 6 miles. I look back. Abram Lucero is precisely 20 yards behind me. And I think, okay, this is where it happens. And I put the pedal down, and I ran as fast as I could for about 40 seconds. Now, you've already run 5 miles. You're running as fast as you can for 40 seconds. That's a lot of exertion. And I put some distance between me and Abram Lucero, and I look back, and he's exactly 20 yards behind me. And I think, uh-oh. So I try to keep the pace, get up to the final straightaway. It's about 300 yards when we turn onto the street that the church is on. It's a little bit of a slight uphill. And I'm thinking, okay, for the pride of old men everywhere, I've got to keep him off. And I put it down, and I run as hard as I can. I mean, I am giving it everything I got. And I look back, and Abram Lucero is 20 yards behind me. And I slow back down to the normal pace. And here he comes, 15 yards, 10 yards, 5 yards, and he gets to about 2 yards behind me, and I think, this is not going to happen. And I pour it on one more time. We're within, 150 yards of the finish now. And I give it everything I've got. And he runs right past me without a sweat. And he goes, see ya. And he gets 20 yards ahead of me. And I think, okay, this time it's really it. I'm going to catch him. And I give it this superhuman effort that I didn't even know existed. And I get about 5 yards behind him. And this was before, you guys remember Usain Bolt from the Olympics? Yeah. He Usain Bolts me when I get to 5 yards behind him. Now, here's what happened. It was very interesting. We're 100 yards from the finish line, and something happened that I never would have expected in a million years. Did not know that this was possible. I run track in high school. I ran cross country in high school. I've run a lot. And I was shocked. As soon as he Usain Bolted me, and I knew that I couldn't beat him, I knew that I couldn't beat him. Not only did he beat me, but my whole body shut down. I could not run. I actually stopped, and I buckled my knees, and I fell to the ground. I couldn't move. I laid there in a heap for about 2 minutes. And they all probably thought I died. I don't know. Old guy, he had a heart attack. He's 33. He's practically dead. I finally staggered to my feet, and all I could do was walk. I couldn't even jog. After 2 full minutes on the ground, and of course, I walk across the finish line. I mean, the third place kid, I mean, he was, who knows, miles behind. But man, they were giving me the business. I mean, you would have thought that I was the biggest idiot on the planet, because I probably was. Here's what I didn't know. No matter what you believe, if you believe it's possible, if you believe it's not possible, your brain is 100% in charge. That's why it's critical that you identify what these beliefs are, and you then have the ability to start chipping away at them. Look at where you're at. I asked you this at the very beginning. Where are you at financially? Other places in your life too, relationships, health-wise, but let's just talk about your finances if you are a business owner. Why are you not where you want to be? And I would say that it probably has a lot to do with the way you believe about yourself and your abilities and what you can do and what's possible. Now, we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to stay on the same topic of belief, but I'm going to tell you, well, actually, I've got to finish this story. There's an interesting subplot to this. I'm going to go to the next slide. Watch what happens here. This is what's really interesting, and this is the key to really getting better. Watch this. The first servant had 5, turned it into 10. How many talents does the first servant have after 2 seasons? There's a very specific number. It's actually sort of a math riddle. Can anybody sort it out and figure it out? What is it? It's not 22. It's a good guess. Well, here's what we know.
35.
No. The answer is 24. Well, how do you figure? Here's how I figure. The master gave him 1 extra talent, so he had 11. And then he went and doubled that, so he had 22. So where'd the other 2 come from? Well, the master probably gave him 2 more after he achieved 22. This is the magic that I don't understand how it works. And maybe you do, and you could help me understand it. But here's what I know. When you've got belief, and you believe double where you're at and you achieve it, then you get upgraded. You get these upgrades from the master. Now, if you want to get religious, is it God that's giving you this? But here's what I know. Your belief becomes not linear, it becomes exponential. Because look what happens. After 3 seasons, it goes to 54. Why would it slow down? Why would he just add 5 more talents every time? If you can truly believe double where you're currently at, then when you achieve 10, which is now 11, which is now 22, which is now 24, you double that, it's now 48. And now the master gives you not just 2 or 1, but now 4. How many times can we run this cycle? And the answer is, it's unlimited. It's absolutely unlimited. How would you explain that there are people in this world? Well, we were talking, Justin and me were talking on the plane. We just shot a video for a guy. He's in manufacturing. He's one of my old clients, and he came back and he asked me to shoot him a video. He bought his partners out. It's a box company. He bought his partners out, 2 of them, for $25 million apiece. How much money do you have to buy somebody out for $25 million apiece? Answer? Probably about 54 talents worth of money, or some derivative thereof. The guy that has 2 goes to 8. He went from 2 to 4, 4 to 8, but when he went from 8 to 16, then he got those extra 2 added to him. What happens to the third guy? Nothing. He goes to 0 because it gets taken away. I've watched this over and over again. You know, it's an interesting thing. There's a story in a book. Who's read a book called Good to Great? Anyone? Pretty good book. There's a story in there. Now, here's what the book Good to Great is. It's written by a guy named Jim Collins, and he's trying to document certain companies that over a certain period of time achieved stock market returns that were not just good, but great. And he's trying to see what made these companies that have done good for a long time in the stock market suddenly jump and achieve great results. And it was a very methodical book. It had very interesting. Anyway, there's several factors. I'm not here to go through all the factors of that book. I'm here to talk about one particular factor of that book. As a part of that book, Jim Collins, the author, interviewed a guy named James Stockdale. Anybody ever heard of this guy, James Stockdale? You might recognize that name. James Stockdale was the highest ranking officer in the Vietnam prisoner of war camp known as the Hanoi Hilton, which you probably have heard of. You heard of that? Hanoi Hilton? We've seen movies about this, you know, it's a pretty serious situation. Well, he interviewed him because Jim Collins, the author of the book, had noticed that there's a pretty strong correlation from people that were prisoners of war in Vietnam and success that they achieved after the war. In other words, it was uncanny the level of financial and personal success that many of these prisoners of war obtained. So Jim Collins, while he's writing a book called Good to Great, he wanted to find out what was the experience that allowed these prisoners of war to be so successful in their post-war life. So he took and interviewed the highest ranking officer, which was James Stockdale. And so he went out to where he lived. He sat down with him and he asked him the question. He said, so what made the difference between the prisoners that made it out alive and the ones that died in prison? And he said, Stockdale answered him with no hesitation. He said, that's easy. The people that made it, the people that died in the prison camp, inevitably, always, they were the optimists. And Jim Collins, the author, kind of took a step back and he said, the optimists? What do you mean the optimists died? And he said, well, the optimists were easy to spot. They would be dragged into the prison camp. Of course, it was terrible situations. We were starved, we were beaten, we were tortured. I mean, it was the real deal, Vietnam prisoner of war camp. He said, but the optimists would always come in and they would say this. They would say things like, we'll be out of here by Christmas. This is terrible, this is horrible, these conditions are difficult, but we'll be out here by Christmas. He said Christmas would come, Christmas would go, and then they'd say, well, we'll be out here by Easter. And then Easter would come and go, and then they'd say, well, 4th of July would come and go. And he said those guys almost never made it to the second Christmas. They almost always died in prison camp before the second Christmas. And so Jim Collins, a little bit sobered by that discussion, said, okay, so who made it out alive then? The pessimists? And he said, no. Here's who made it out. The people that made it out were the people that were able to confront the brutal facts, yet never lose sight of their final destination. They never lost faith. Confront the brutal facts. And he said they would bring prisoners of war in, and he said they would do everything in their power to help them confront the brutal facts. You know, they had very limited communication. James Stockdale was actually the one that instituted, I don't know if you know anything about this, but they had a tap code where they could tap on the walls and communicate to the other prisoners. He put that in place. He also put in place something that was known as a step-gate torture process, where at certain levels of torture, they were supposed to give certain types of information because they knew that if the prisoner just tried to avoid giving any information, they would crack and they'd give all the information. And he was very instrumental in this. He said they would get the new prisoners in and they would tell them, you have to confront the brutal facts. Here's the brutal facts. Number 1, you will be tortured. Number 2, you will be starved. Number 3, you will be treated inhumanly. Number 4, you may be in here for a really, really long time, measured in years, not weeks, not months, years. You got it? No, we'll be out of here by Christmas. Confront the brutal facts. He said, but you know what? We never lost faith. Never that we would be released. You know how long Stockdale was in there for? 7 years. Think about it this way. Let's assume, just for conversation, that you were accused of a crime justly. You committed it. And you were sentenced to 7 years in prison. You would know during the entire 7 years that at a certain point, 7 years in the future, assuming good behavior and so forth, that you would be released. You could continually count down to that date. Now let's assume that you're in the Vietnam prisoner of war camp and you've been in there for a year. Now you've been in there for 2 years. Now you've been in there for 3 years, tortured the entire time. 4 years, 5 years. Think about how long 6 years is. He said, but we confronted the brutal facts, but we never lost faith that we would kiss the soil of America. And there's stories, man. There's a guy that called himself Lucky Larry. I don't know if you heard about this guy. He got out. He kept the faith in his wife. He had been married. He got out. He found out that his wife had divorced him 5 years before and remarried. He remarried. He had a kid. He was driving to church one day. He had meetings after church, so his wife and daughter were driving in the car in front of him, and he watched his wife and daughter's car get hit by a train, and they were both killed right in front of his eyes while he's driving to church. And he calls himself Lucky Larry. It's almost a little twisted. But here's a guy who understands. Confront the brutal facts. Now, as a business owner, here's what I tried to teach guys. You've got to confront the brutal facts, but never lose sight of your final destination. So let's explore these two things, and then we'll wrap up, and you guys can go home for the night. So what are the brutal facts of running a business? Here's brutal fact number one, particularly if you're new. The brutal fact is you're a one-talent guy. That's a brutal fact. Now, you say, well, I've been in business a lot longer. I've had a certain level of success. Okay, great. You're a two-talent guy, or you're a five-talent guy. But you've got to look at, honestly, at your production level, and you've got to put yourself where you really, truly are. Here's what I've observed. I've observed that it's very easy to surround yourself with people that think you're awesome. And that's how you get from an actual level of 3 to a perceived level of 10. And here's what happens. It gets you in trouble. It's a humility thing. It's a pride thing. You start chasing things. Oh, I'm going to grow my business, and you grow it faster than you have the ability to do it. You want to know how I went from 90 employees doing $23 million in sales to doing less than $1 million in sales and 6 employees in about a year? Thought I was awesome. Thought I was awesome. I had a 7,800 square foot house. I was driving Hummers and Corvettes, and I looked around, and everybody else I knew was doing worse. Yeah, everybody should try being broke after you've had money. It's a very interesting experience. It's a very humbling experience. What are the brutal facts? Number one, you're a one-talent guy, or you're whatever talent level you are. Number two, it takes time. We've been a little bit misled, I think. We hear stories about guys who started companies very quickly, got wealthy, and we think maybe we can take that same route. I'm meeting in Kansas City on Friday with a guy that started a remodeling company, kitchen and bath remodeling company in 2008, and he grew it to $12 million in 2012. Now, I don't know about you, but that's pretty impressive. In this industry, that's darn impressive. But you know how he did it? The reason he did it was because it was the third time he's done it. Okay? He showed up starting that company as a 10-talent guy. He was able to grow it to 12 million very, very quickly. He took a whole year, it was 2014, he took a whole year to shore up his processes so that now in 2015 he can grow it to $20 million in sales. And he's smart enough to know that he doesn't know exactly how to get there from a marketing standpoint. That's why I'm meeting with him. Hey, I'm trying to go to $20 million. I need help.
See, this is the difference between saying, hey, I built this company to 12 million, I'm a 10 talent guy, pat myself on the back and saying, no, 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 here's who I am. It takes time. For you and your business, it's going to take some time. Let that be okay. Spend the time to do the things that you need to. I'll give you just one little interesting story from the days as a having these consultants. I wrote a CD program. It was 10 CDs long, 11 hours long. I published it in 2004. It represented really my life's work in marketing. It took me over a year to write it. I recorded it. It was awesome, I'm going to tell you. We still sell this program. It's a really great program. It's called Monopolize Your Marketplace. I was in a national conference with about 550 of my consultants in 2004, January. The CDs had just come off the presses. I held them up in their cases. They were beautiful. I was so proud of them. And I said this to my consultants. I will make you an ironclad promise. Here's the promise. If you will listen to this CD set 20 times, all the way through, make notes, whatever, but if you'll listen to this 20 times through, I promise you, you will be successful in this business. I absolutely promise you. That was on January 30th, 2004. Well, later that year, I started doing some regional conferences with these guys. And on May 7th, February, March, April, May 7th, 3 months and a week later, I showed up to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and I talked to 8 guys. And then the next day I showed up to Nashville and I talked to 22 guys. Excuse me, it was 22 in Fort Lauderdale and 8 in Nashville. 30 guys over the course of 2 days. They didn't know this, but when I got there, I took a little quiz. I said, everybody get out a piece of paper, I'm going to ask you some questions. And I asked them questions, what's your name? They wrote it down, and how long have you been involved with our organization, and how many clients do you have, and how much money are you making? And then I asked them this question, about the 7th or 8th question down. How many times have you listened to the CD set all the way through? It only counts if you've completed all 10 CDs. That counts as one time. Out of 30 guys, anybody want to guess what the average was? 1. The average, I have to do the math, was 1.1, including about 14, I believe, that had listened 0 times. 0. 3 months, 0 times. There was another 10 or so that had listened one time. It was bizarre. There was 2 guys that had listened 8 times each, unrelated to each other. They just happened to both listen to it 8 times. What did I just describe? The 80-20 rule, right? More like the 95-5 rule. Why would you not do the single most important thing that you could do to be successful at what you do? And the answer is real simple. Because people are not willing to put in the time and the effort. Why are they not willing to put in the time and the effort? And I'm going to tell you, it goes all the way back to here. They don't believe it'll work. Don't believe it'll work. Why would I spend that much time listening to this dumb thing if I didn't believe it worked? Because see, here's what happened in that business. People came to me, they said, here, I'm going to give you $35,000 for the opportunity to be trained and to be a consultant. And they figured that if they handed me $35,000 and they got on the training.
I took my first job out of college working for my dad. And he was a great dad to work for because he paid really, really low wages. And whenever I went to him and said, hey, I need to make more money, he said, hey, great, be worth more money. And I ended up working for him for about, gosh, it must have been about 9 months. And I struck out on my own, and I've been at it ever since. And there was a lot of support there for my dad to do that, so I don't want to sound negative. But I had an interesting and unique experience in my life when I was, gosh, it was 2000 through 2005, about a 5-year period of time. At the time, I was roughly 30 years old. I turned 30 in 1999, so it was just right after that. And the experience is that I had the ability to get a firsthand, not just a look, I was deeply in the trenches of watching an incubator for entrepreneurs. Okay, so I already was an entrepreneur. I had been since 1994 when I started my business. This is about 6 years in. And during that time, what I had an ability to observe was I started a business
that was an offshoot of my original business. My original business is why I was a marketing consultant. I told you that I worked with a company like Lawn Smith Roofing. That was early in my career. I ended up working with another company called National Bank Drafting Systems, and I got involved with this company on a profit-sharing basis. And we took that company using marketing from about $2 million in sales to the high 28, $29 million in sales in about 2 years. And my partner at the time and I were able to participate in the profitability of that company. It was very profitable, and I was very young. I was almost right around 30 years old, made a lot of money, thought I was really cool and really awesome, which I really wasn't, but I thought I was. And we took and expanded our business at the time. And the way that we expanded our business was we went out all around the country and we started to recruit and train and support marketing consultants all over the country. It was sold as a business opportunity. It was very similar to a franchise, except it was technically not a franchise. It was a licensing situation. They paid us a licensing fee. It was substantial. And we recruited over the course of about 4 years, 4.5 years, we recruited about 1,100 of these people in every state in the country and Canada, and a few assorted ones from overseas, but it wasn't a big part. And here's the punchline. That business completely, utterly, totally failed. We went from having a 16,000 square foot office with 90 employees to I don't know, I never counted the square feet. Let's call it 1,000 square foot office with 6 employees in about a 1-year period of time. It crashed and it burned spectacularly. Part of the reason it crashed and burned is because of some things that I did. Some of the reasons it crashed and burned were a really toxic partnership situation. And part of the reason that it crashed and burned is that the elements of what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur were much different than I expected they would be going into that. So here's how that worked. I had made a lot of money being a marketing consultant, and I went out to the marketplace, and the sales pitch went like this. If you're tired of your job, and if you want to make more money, and you're tired of working for somebody else, I've got a system that I can show you that'll allow you to be your own boss, be a marketing consultant, we'll train you how to do it, we'll give you support, and you can make, and the claim we used to make was you can make $300,000 to $700,000 a year as a marketing consultant. And to us, that claim seemed very middle of the road because, quite frankly, we had earned a lot more than that being marketing consultants at a very young age. And it never really occurred to me that you couldn't just take anybody else that seemed reasonably motivated and make them into a successful entrepreneur. I know now that that was a false thought. And I'm going to give you some ideas of what I saw both in the people that I worked with and in myself that allowed success and failure to happen as entrepreneurs. Now, I want to ask you this question before we get started. Who in the room, by show of hands, owns the company that you're here representing? You're the actual owner. Okay, by way of a different way of asking, who's not the owner of the company? Okay, looks like maybe a 60-40 split. Does that sound about right? I'm here today to talk to the business owners. I'm here to offer you some encouragement. I'm here to offer you some hindsight things that I've learned that maybe can help you as you move forward in your business, okay? If you're not the owner of the business and you'd like to be, well, maybe this can help you out. But I don't have a big message for the people that are employees, the people that are, not trying to do their own thing. But maybe you'll find some value in it anyway. The first concept I want to throw out is what's the difference between an entrepreneur and not an entrepreneur? And there's been books written on this. Maybe you've read a book called, what's it called? Michael Gerber, The E-Myth. And he talks about there's a myth that somebody that owns their own business is an entrepreneur. And really, most entrepreneurs from that standpoint are really just technicians. It's a guy that's good at installing roofs, and now he gets his own roofing company, and now suddenly he thinks he's an entrepreneur. But here's what I found. I found that it really has a lot more to do with not so much are you a technician or not a technician. It has more to do with what I call IPV and DPV. And these are some funny little initials that I came up with. It stands for the following. IPV stands for independent personal value. I'll just jot them on the board. I'm kind of a whiteboard scratcher. IPV and DPV. IPV, independent personal value. DPV is dependent personal value. Now here's what this means. In the context of running, starting, owning, and growing a business, IPV says, I'm the kind of person that has independent personal value. I am not reliant on a pre-existing organization or company or entity of some sort to be able to add value to the marketplace. The opposite of that is dependent personal value. I am dependent on an existing organization or company or structure of some sort that I can plug into and add value to the organization and therefore add value to, the economy at large and make money. Okay? IPV versus DPV. I found that these two things are extraordinarily different, and most people don't understand that these two different things exist and that they're different. I'll give you an example. I knew a guy, I still know the guy, but at the time, this is money and how important it is and how important it might not be or how much it can corrupt people. Because I know people struggle with that concept, money. It's not always just awesome. Sometimes it comes with strings attached. We've all heard the stories about the lottery people, right? And they go insane and they end up 10 times worse than before they had the money. But I want you to think about Nancy Brinker, and I want you to think about this grieving sister who put this goal and this dream of solving breast cancer. And it's now, that was 1982 when she died, so it's been 33 years, and it still hasn't been solved. But she's still here. She's still fighting. And it went from being a multi-million-dollar organization to a multi-billion-dollar organization, and I don't really keep up with it all that much to know. But here's what I want you to think about. What's keeping you from getting where you're trying to get? What is your final destination? If it's not bright and it's not clear, like getting back to America to kiss American soil, whether it's 2 or 7 years from now, or if it's something that's keeping you going. Napoleon Hill, I'm kind of a Napoleon Hill reader, not really fan maybe is the wrong word, but he talks about this concept, definite chief aim. What is the reason that God put you here on this big blue marble that's specifically unique to you that nobody else has the ability to do? Because it's you. You were called to it. What is it? And I'm telling you, it's really hard to affect big things when you got to get back to work on Monday morning to pay the lousy bills. So think about this. It's the Stockdale paradox. It has a lot to do with belief. Confront the brutal facts. Never lose sight of your final destination. Think about that for a minute. I asked a very wealthy friend of mine. I know him through business. I'm not trying to act like all my friends are super wealthy, but whatever. Guy was in business for a long time, made a lot of money, and I said, what's your definite chief aim? What is it? And I explained to him the concept of definite chief aim. And he looked at me and he goes, I don't know. He goes, all I'm thinking about is making money. I go, but look how much money you've already made. You don't need any more money. And he said, I don't know what else to do. And I'm really good at it. And I thought, that's just a waste. Somebody that's that good, that influential, that powerful, that much belief and ability, but doesn't have some bigger purpose. So I just encourage you to think about that. The last concept is real simple. And I've got a funny little graphic for it. This is about how to achieve your definite chief aim. And it's about who you surround yourself with. And here's what I found. There's four different classes of people. And this is just something to think about. The first one is your inner core. These are the people that are very, very close to you. These are the people that you can confide in your deepest fears and dreams, and they will support you in that. If you have 3 people in your lifetime that fit that mold, you are lucky. But seek these people out. Seek the relationships that can deliver somebody into your inner circle. Outside of that, you've got what I call your supporting cast. These are the people that support you, they cheer for you, but they're not going to be your inner circle. This is maybe your family, but sometimes the family is not necessarily supportive, right? But who is your inner circle? Who is your supporting cast? Now, outside of that, you've got what's called indifference. These are the rest of the world, people that don't care about you one way or the other. It's not a negative thing. It's called there's so many people in the world, how can you possibly care about everybody? Indifference. But here's the ones that I want you to watch out for, and I'll show you the graphic. These are the people that are floating around. So you got your inner circle, your supporting cast, your indifference, and then outside of that, you've got what's called the NJAs. NJA is an acronym. It stands for negative jackasses. Right? And these are the people that want nothing more than to tear you down, to pull your dreams apart. And I want to tell you, sometimes these people are very close to you, and you've got to protect your dream against all costs. I was talking to a guy just the other day, and he was telling me that when he was young, he was considered a dreamer, and he had all these dreams of things he wanted to do, and somebody very influential in his life said, you got to give it up. And this is somebody that was influential and had a position of authority and power. It's really discouraging when you hear stories like that. But I would encourage you, build a mastermind, a group of people that surround you, that support you. That'll help you develop your inner circle, also your supporting cast, but also at all costs, you've got to take these NJAs and keep them as far away from you as possible. They're toxic. They'll tear you down. And anyway, that's it. That's all I have for you today. Hopefully that's helpful. Thanks.